and click record. So we've just started recording once again. To start, just a couple quick announcements on behalf of the museum. First, we would like to start by acknowledging that the Oshawa Museum is situated on the traditional territory and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nations. Our work on these lands acknowledges the signatory communities of the Williams Treaty, as well as the Mississauga Nation and other members of the broader Indigenous community for their resilience and their long-standing contributions to the area now known as the Durham region. We're grateful to be able to meet virtually and meet in person when able to on these lands. So thank you. By the way, I'm very excited to announce tonight's guest speaker and to introduce her tonight. Sonya Jones is the Curator of Collections and has been at the Robert McLaughlin Gallery since 2008. Prior to the RMG, Sonya worked for a private art dealer in Toronto, the Canadian Heritage Information Network, and Carleton University Art Gallery. She completed an honors BA at Carleton University and a postgrad certificate in museum management and curatorship at Fleming College. Great program. Not that I'm biased or anything. She has curated over 50 exhibitions featuring the Thomas Folkley collection of historical images and over 20 art exhibitions. So thank you once again, and I hope you all virtually join me in welcoming Sonya tonight.
Hello everyone, thanks so much for having me, and thank you Lisa and to the museum for inviting me to speak to your wonderful membership today. So this is a little bit of a different talk for me because when I've spoken to the Oshawa Historical Society in the past, the focus has been on the Thomas Folkley collection because that's part of my role as the Curator of Collections. But I thought that tonight I'd shake things up a little bit and kind of talk about the other side of my role for the last 3 years, which is the Curator of the art collection as well. And so tonight I'm going to share some stories that are particularly interesting or just entertaining, and bring some of the art in the RMG's collection to life and just kind of animate it. So this is the first time I've done this lecture, so bear with me. I was really had a lot of fun putting it together. So I've got a whole whack of screens going on here, but so I want to start off by saying that art is a subjective thing. Sometimes you see an artwork and it doesn't really do anything for you. It might confuse you or make you uncomfortable, or you just might not like it. And of course, art can have a powerful effect on you as well. You might just absolutely love it, be moved by it. It has such a different effect depending on what you're looking at. But I've found over the years of giving tours of exhibitions that when people hear the stories behind the art or even putting the exhibition together, that they can find new or different appreciation or perspective on that artwork. Storytelling really forges connections and between people and ideas, and it's a really powerful and effective tool in talking about art. So some of the most, I'm going to go share my screen now. Sorry, I forgot to do that. Here we go. Oops. Sorry, 1 second. It's showing the first slide. Okay, so going back. Can you guys see now? Melissa, Lisa, can you confirm that you can see this?
No, not yet.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me try that again.
I think you were midway. Perfect. Yeah, I think you were midway after we tested to make sure.
That's right. Thank you.
We see it now.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So some of the most famous artworks in Western art history are works that are interesting because they have really interesting facts or mystery around them. So the stories are one of the reasons why we still talk about these paintings and why they're still studied extensively. So for example, this portrait, not in the RMG's collection, is the Arnolfini portrait by Jan van Eyck, which was a painting from 1434 that still captivates people with its mystery and layers of meaning. I, for one, wrote a paper about it when I was doing my undergrad. So here we see a couple standing in a beautifully furnished room dressed in heavy-looking fabrics and furs, and there's kind of carefully placed objects and symbols that kind of add further meaning to this painting and have kind of intrigued people for years. So for instance, the little dog at the feet, said to symbolize fidelity or loyalty, or can be seen as an emblem of lust, or it could just be a dog. A single lit candle in the chandelier, possibly representing the candle used in traditional Fleming marriage customs, or to allude to the presence of the Holy Ghost. And then you can see the oranges on the table behind the gentleman, and they can, represent just wealth, because oranges and that type of exotic fruit was a sign of wealth, or it could be purity and innocence. And then the one detail that everybody's fascinated by is this convex mirror on the wall that shows the couple and the scene reflected in it, including another figure in the room thought to be the artist himself. So some art historians have spent their entire careers attempting to decipher these symbols. And it just goes to show that those little details in a painting can really intrigue and fascinate, just as the inspiration behind making the work or the story of the artists themselves. So for example, an example of a fascination with an artist is this Artemisia Gentileschi's painting, Judith slaying Holofernes. So Gentileschi was an Italian Baroque painter who was overshadowed in Western art history until the early 1900s, when she was rediscovered as one of the most accomplished 17th century artists. She was producing professional work by the age of 15 in an era when women had few opportunities. Her incredible achievements and talents, however, was overshadowed by the story, the unfortunate story of her rape when she was 15 years old. And this story has really defined kind of the interpretation of her work. So in this painting, it depicts a scene in the Bible when Judith assassinates Holofernes, showing the moment her and her maidservant beheaded the general while he slept. This painting in particular has been interpreted as a feminist painting made by a woman involved in a sensational rape trial when she was 17 years old. But more recent interpretations of this work has kind of shifted away from kind of this revenge painting by, an abused woman to more of a painting that shows the incredible techniques that this woman had following in the tradition of Caravaggio, and kind of her ability to portray death and loss. So this just goes to show how much stories can really alter our interpretation of and appreciation of a work. So those are just two examples of artworks where the stories and details of the work have intrigued viewers for hundreds of years. So now to talk about the incredible collection that we have right here in Oshawa at the Robert McLaughlin Gallery. So tonight I'm going to share some of the stories that I know about the artworks in the collection that's been shared with me, or that I've read in the file, or has just been passed down by different people in the position, that bring a new meaning or appreciation to the work. And are at times just, a funny story, or just gives you a whole different insight into the painting. So the gallery has over 4,700 artworks in its collection that we show in approximately 5 exhibitions per year. So about 70 of these works are on view at any given time in the permanent collection gallery spaces. And we also loan our work from the collection to other institutions nationally as well as internationally. So the collection includes historical, modern, and contemporary art, and our exhibitions reflect that. And we, of course, store all of this work in the building in a vault below the gallery spaces, which you can see here. This is what the inside of the vault looks like. So this section kind of covers discoveries and interesting stories, as well as kind of insight into the artists themselves. So starting with kind of a heavy hitter in the collection, Antoine Sebastian Plamondon. This painting is called St. Charles Borromeo from 1840. So Antoine Plamondon was an important historical Quebec artist who is really best known for his portraits as well as his religious paintings. And the gallery has 3 works by him in the collection, but this is probably the most important one. This work is really large. It's about 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide, and it depicts the 16th century figure, St. Charles Borromeo. When it was received into the collection, it was slightly water damaged and in need of a good cleaning. But what the gallery didn't know, that there was more that met the eye with this painting. So it was discovered that an art dealer who had sold the painting to the Loeb family, who was the owners prior to the gallery, had found the painting rolled up, collecting dust in a small church in Quebec. And he realized when he saw it that it was a signed Plamondon. So he actually purchased the painting from the church, and then he later sold it to the Loeb family. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting and a little strange. So when the gallery first received this painting, St. Charles was actually holding up a scroll. So when the RMG reached out to the art dealer for research purposes, he told the RMG that when he bought the painting from the church in Quebec, St. Charles was not holding a scroll, he was holding a crucifix. And so this crucifix was obviously painted over at some point after the next owners had it. So in 1992, the RMG had the Canadian Conservation Institute X-ray and clean the painting to reveal the original painting underneath. So sure enough, that was where there's the crucifix that he had mentioned painted underneath. So the crucifix actually makes more sense with the story of St. Charles Borromeo, because more so than the scroll anyway. So in 1575, the saint went to Milan where people were dying from the plague. And the story goes that while he was so distressed by what he saw that he actually walked down the streets of the city holding up a crucifix in the hopes of driving out the plague. So that's why the fact that he's holding a crucifix actually makes more sense to the painting. So the mystery is kind of as to this work is not only what was discovered when it was cleaned and x-rayed, but it was also the fact that why would the crucifix have been painted over. And one theory was that it didn't actually suit the religious beliefs of the next owner, and so maybe that's why they did it. But there's still a little bit of mystery as to how a Plamondon painting ended up in this very small church in Quebec, because the painting is very large and too large to fit in any of the church's walls. But also Plamondon at this time had significant value. And so there's a bit of confusion as to like the fact that this church could afford having a Plamondon. But nevertheless, despite all these wonderful mysteries that makes this painting so much more intriguing, we're so pleased to have it in the collection. And yeah, it still fascinates after all this time. So this next painting is by E. Wiley Greer. It's called Children's Party 1910. So Greer was born in Melbourne, Australia in 1862, but his family moved to England and then came to Canada in 1876. He actually attended the Upper Canada College and then attended the Slade School of Art in London in 1879. He was interested in drawing and painting at a very young age. And in fact, he met the group of seven later in life about in 1925, where he debated the pros and cons of what the group was actually doing at the time. So Greer was knighted in 1935 while still president of the Royal Canadian Academy. And he often used his own family as inspiration. And so in this painting, kind of in this impressionist manner, Greer has captured the birthday party, the 12th birthday party of his daughter Stella, who's at the center of the painting, joined by her two brothers beside her, Crawford and Jeffrey. So this painting of this festive scene gives us insight as to how, what would have been served at such an occasion and what a party would have looked like at this time in 1910. And so you can see there's the party crackers, there's party hats, as well as oranges, pears, and grapes and different food. But this is another example of a work that, when sent to a painting conservator, more was discovered with the painting. So in this case, the top 15.5 inches of the canvas was actually missing. So it was rolled up and folded behind the frame, and so that you could only see almost to the top of the party hat, on that first kind of middle part of the window. And so when it got conserved, this was discovered, and it was this wonderful discovery, because this night sky that you're seeing really adds to the charm of the painting, but it also gives a really good sense of the scale of the room that this party is taking place in. And so this was, one of those wonderful discoveries. I think that what happened was that, they had a frame that they already had, and it didn't fit the frame, and so they made it fit. But we're very glad to kind of to have had the chance to be able to bring it back to its former glory. Another thing that was discovered at the back of the canvas in the rolled part that was hidden behind was actually the names of the children. So another thing that was discovered that added, further meaning to the work. So the next works that I'm going to be talking about are these 3 portraits by Harold Town. So the artist Harold Town was an artist known for his, booming personality and his passion for abstraction. He was a member of the first Ontario abstract collective group called Painters 11. And as some of you might know, Oshawa has a very special connection with Painters 11 in that they were founded at Oshawa artist Alexandra Luke's Thixon Point Cottage. So the RMG actually has a unique mandate to educate and program works by the 11 members of Painters 11. And we actually have 91 works by Harold Town in the collection. So although best known for being an abstract artist, these are clearly not abstract paintings, these are portraits. But there's, in the file of these works, there's this wonderful article written by a reporter that asked Town the question, can an abstract painter do a good portrait? So Town's response was, quotes, in the slick portraiture of the classic tradition, no great portraits have been done since Sargent, but the best have been done are by abstract painters like Picasso and Graham Sutherland. So the reporter then asked him, how about you? Can you do a portrait? So after he told the story that I'm going to share with you next about, this portrait commission that he did, his answer was, I'm so good at portraits, it frightens me. So I just love that quote. It just sums up Harold Town so perfectly. But now for the story of, these particular portraits. So in the 1950s, Town received a portrait commission from a wealthy Bay Street businessman named Joseph Bauer, whom Harold actually, or Town, called Mr. Blue, as in blue chip. Bauer would visit Town at his studio for long sittings, and in this process, it actually stretched out for about 5 months because every sitting ended up with dinner and drinks at a fine first-class restaurant, which, of course, Mr. Blue generously paid for. Bauer was so impressed with Town's work that he gave him full freedom to keep painting portraits until Town felt like he was finished. In the end, Town did 5 oils of Bauer before he felt like he had exhausted the subject. So Town at the time was still a struggling artist. When the time came for him to deliver the work to this wealthy Bay Street investor, he couldn't afford a delivery service. So instead, he strapped roller skates onto the picture frame and rolled the painting right down Bay Street to the man's office. And not to mention, Town later discovered, as so the story goes, that he actually had a hole in his pants and on his bottom when he delivered this painting to the fancy Bay Street towers. So after delivery, he asked Bauer for investment advice, like, what kind of investment advice can you give a guy like me? And Bauer reportedly responded, buy a good suit. Then when the crash comes, you won't look like a bum. So Town listened to this advice and would eventually buy 3 suits. And according to the author Iris Knowles, who was in a relationship with Harold Town, so knew him very well, they ended up being the only 3 suits that he ever owned in his lifetime. And so these 3 portraits tell such a wonderful story of a very passionate artist who was, having a really wonderful experience with this portrait commission because he had full freedom. But I just love that story of how he delivered these paintings. And what's also special about them is they show such 3 different portraits. The one on the left is quintessentially Harold Town style in a portrait format. This one seems like it was a bit more of like a study and looser and more expressive. And then this one is softer and more realist in approach. And so it's really wonderful that we have these 3 very different examples of this and really fun story of this portrait commission. So another portrait story comes from the artist Marlene Hilton Moore's portrait of Doris McCarthy from 1988. So This was part of Marlene Hilton Moore's series of portraits featuring Canadian artists. And this portrait features the incredible landscape painter, Doris McCarthy. And it looks like an ordinary portrait, but there's a couple of details that tell a really interesting story about how it came to be, but also what you see. The first is that at the back of the painting are tire marks, and there's a particular significance to the white pin that's on the sweater of the artist. So I'll start from the beginning of the story. Hilton Moore first approached Doris McCarthy about sitting for a portrait, and at first McCarthy was reluctant. In a letter about the painting, Doris wrote, quote, "I was appalled at the prospect of wasting 12 hours of my precious time sitting around talking about art. I had all too little time to do it, which interested me far more than talking about it." But she agreed, and as long as she could do some writing on her biography while she sat. So the two artists actually developed a really lovely friendship during this process, and they enjoyed their time together, taking breaks to have tea and talk about art together. So now for the story of how tire marks ended up on the back of this painting. So Hilton Moore was commuting from where she lived, which was Barrie, to the Scarborough Bluffs to Doris McCarthy's house. So one day, as she turned off the highway, a gust of wind caught the corner of the canvas in the back of her truck at just the right angle, sending the canvas flying onto the road where it was immediately run over. So the stretcher was completely broken, and the front of the canvas was also damaged. But thankfully, when she showed up to Doris McCarthy's house, obviously very distraught and upset, they determined that it wasn't irreparable. And so they obviously replaced the stretcher, and Hilton Moore painted some fixes on the front. So the front of the canvas was fixed, but the thing that still remains is the tire marks on the back of the painting. And I apologize, I meant to go to the gallery and be able to take a picture of the back of this painting with the tire marks, but I didn't get a chance to this week. So the second detail of this painting that makes it really a fun story is the white pin on Doris McCarthy's sweater that she's wearing. So according to Doris McCarthy, when she was presented with the completed portrait by Hilton Moore, she liked the painting, but she was disappointed that her white snowflake pin that she always wore was not included. So the pin was really special to the artist, as it was the pin from her membership to the Order of Canada. So when she pointed it out to Hilton Moore, telling her, you know, how come you didn't include my pin? The artist quickly added the pin later after the completion of the work, and Doris was very happy that it was included. So that's the fun story of this wonderful painting by Marlene Hilton Moore. So this portrait, again, is by Frederick Varley, and it's called Character Study, Mrs. Surrey from 1937. So Frederick Varley was a Canadian painter and a founding member of the Group of Seven. So although he was a very good landscape painter, he's probably best known now as a portrait artist. And his best portraits were of those who he had a strong emotional attachment to, like friends and family. So the subject of this painting is Mrs. Surrey, who Varley lived with for a short time. So the story was told by Philip Surrey, who's the son of the sitter of this portrait, who wrote that while staying for about 2 months with his mother and himself in Philip's apartment in Tupper Street in Montreal, Frederick Varley painted 3 portraits of Mrs. Surrey, his mother. And his mother didn't like any of them. So her son, Philip, says that the painting is actually a very good likeness to her, but it wasn't flattering enough to please her. And so there's a story that Philip wrote about that one day him and Fred Varley were having a beer in the kitchen when they heard a strange sound come from the other room. The 2 men looked at each other and both said at the same time, "She's scraping off the portrait!" And they rushed into the room to discover that the painting was actually untouched. But the fact that that was their first thought just shows how much she hated this portrait of herself. But for the RMG, it's a really special work, and we love it dearly, and it's only one of 9 works by Varley in the collection. But just a funny story that I read about with this work. So this work is by the legendary Joyce Wieland, and she was legendary for her contribution to the development of contemporary art in Canada. And she was a self-described cultural activist and is best known for celebrating Canadian national identity and bringing forward feminist issues within the predominantly male art culture of the time. So to Wieland, the landscape and ecology of Canada was female, and her work was really interchangeable between issues of gender and nationality. So for this work, called O Canada, Wieland applied bright red lipstick and mouthed the words to O Canada while pressing her lips to a lithographic stone with each syllable. So the results is these rows of lips in various stages of opening and closing. So again, because of the kind of clue of the title, when you look at this work, you can't help but kind of feel your mouth twitch in kind of recognition of these movements of singing O Canada. With this work, she was really responding to the official approval of the national anthem in 1967, for one, but to her, it was really an act of gendered patriotism, so claiming the national identity of Canada as female. So her work is really thought-provoking and challenges the viewer to kind of think about nationality and feminism in different ways. So it's a really cool work in the collection with a great story in terms of the creation of it. And some of you might recognize this work because it was actually up at the gallery for close to, I believe, 10 years or so. So this is a work by William Karelek, who is a well-known Canadian Ukrainian artist. And the image is of a mural that was painted in his home in 1969 when his children were 1, 4, and 6 years old. So he painted this mural directly on the kitchen wall. So you can actually see the blank spaces here. I'm just going to show you right here, where there was a pass-through to the dining room. And I can't see it because there's a list thing here, but over here is where there was a cupboard. So there's a space here, again, where there was a cupboard in the kitchen that he painted around. So sorry, I just lost my place, 1 second. So it was actually, this painting is in much more paler and more pastel colors than kind of the bright colors that Karelek is really known for. And the images are taken from Ukrainian folklore and children's stories. But Karelek, he was also inspired by his own children. So he really did create this for his family and his children. So you can see here, I think you can see my pointer, but the sky is raining donuts. And that's because donuts were his children's favorite treats. So it actually remained in the kitchen until 1989 when Mrs. Karelek had it removed by a professional conservator and placed in the family's dining room. So the images that appear in the mural were inspired from Ukrainian folklore, like I said. And so here's a few details of them. My apologies that they're in black and white. So right here we see a child getting spanked by a list of rules, and the list of rules were dining room rules, so rules for the dining room table. So things like no elbows on the table, don't speak when adults are talking, no whining, no pouting, no singing at the table. But it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek depiction of, you know, the rules giving spanking the child. And then the other picture here is, these were taken when it was in the kitchen, is, you know, pulling down clouds to make cotton candy. And these are some of the other details of the work that are whimsical and fun, and you can imagine has, you know, very captivating to children. I'm just going to go back to the big image. And so, like I said, this work was installed for around 10 years right outside the RMG studio spaces where children's programs would take place. And the children would kind of sit out in front of it, and the educator would, you know, point out different things and have them kind of interact with it. But they were fascinated by it and truly captivated by it. But as someone who had their office for a brief time beside this, not too far from this, but it also captivated adults. Adults would just stand there staring at it as well. So it was really a special work, and it is now removed from that spot, but being stored in the vault. And it's incredibly heavy and incredibly big, as you can imagine, since it was quite literally a wall taken out. And it's really unique to Karelyk's career. It wasn't meant for anyone but his family, and it was a gift to his children. And so the gallery is really lucky to have it in the collection, and it was gifted to us by the family. So another heavy hitter in the collection, I think there's going to be quite a few that I'll be talking about tonight. This one's Alfred Munning's Moving Ups Under Starter's Order. Some of you might have recognized this painting too, because it was on long-term display. I think it was up again for 10 years or so in one of our lounge areas. It's a very large painting, again, with a very heavy gilded frame. So Munnings was known as one of England's finest painters of horses, and as an outspoken critic of modernism. He was known to outwardly speak out against artists like Picasso and Matisse, saying things like, what are pictures for? To fill a man's soul with admiration and sheer joy, not to bewilder and daze him. So interesting though, you can see the influence of Impressionism in this work with the modernist kind of Impressionist sky in the background. So again, a modernist movement influencing his paintings, as you can see in this work. And he had a great love of horses, and he spoke at length about his love for the start of a race, when the horses are kind of milling around, waiting to be let loose in the race, nostrils flaring, adrenaline flowing. So for him, it was always about the start and never the finish of a race. So this painting was sold to E.P. Taylor, who owned the property that would become Winfield's Farm, as most of you know, was a significant part of Oshawa's history, having produced world-class horses and racing horses. But what's wonderful about this painting is it was actually, took him 14 years to paint this. It was really a labor of love. And in a letter to E.P. Taylor, who was the original owner of the work, he wrote, quote, "I have never done such a work before, nor shall I do one again." So it's a painting that has some significance to the gallery, but obviously very much had some significance to the artist. The next work here is by a founding member of the Group of Seven, J.E.H. MacDonald, and it's called Young Canada, painted in 1922. So this is an example of a work that the title really helps add further meaning. So Young Canada is the title. This painting, J.H. MacDonald would later become a founding member of the Group of Seven, but this painting was painted as his diploma piece at the time of his election to the Royal Canadian Academy. But the work was actually rejected. So since that harsh rejection of this painting, the painting has been included in over 20 exhibitions since 1922 across Canada, and is a really important work in our collection. And there's a lot of interpretations of this work related to how the title and the imagery relate. So I'm just going to point out, I hope you can see my cursor, but this little sapling, it's quite dark on my screen, but this little sapling right out in the front. And so it seems to kind of convey a message of how Canada was merely a young country living amidst the larger, more powerful nations. So that's kind of what the title alludes to into the meaning of this work. And this was given to us by a very important patron of the gallery, Oshawa's own Isabel McLaughlin. And she really believed that only MacDonald could express such feelings in paint, because she loved poetry, he loved poetry, and she thought this painting was very poetic. So another work that is in our collection that has not something hidden in it because it's right there on the canvas, but a very odd and interesting detail to it. This is a painting by Gordon Rayner called Evidence 2 Concerning a Drowning in Canoe Lake. So Gordon Rayner was best known as an abstract expressionist painter. He was greatly influenced by Painters 11 members, Jack Bush and William Ronald. So in the late 1960s, he was spending a lot of time at his property in the Muskoka region. And during this time, his work kind of shifted to become more representational, with more kind of landscape or nature depictions in his kind of typical expressionist style. So this painting, entitled Evidence 2, is one of those paintings, but it has a large but interesting detail that kind of elevates it beyond just painting of a body of water. So that black object that you're seeing there is an actual black hat, like a hat that you would put on your head, that has been collaged to the front of this painting, seeming to kind of be floating on the surface of the water. And the title, once again, kind of suggests the meaning behind the painting, in that concerning a drowning in Canoe Lake. So referencing, the hat references Tom Thompson, who drowned in Canoe Lake in 1917. And of course, there's some mystery behind Thompson's death, and the hat kind of hints at kind of this, the cult of Tom Thompson as this like mystic hero with this mysterious death. And so, yeah, this very expressionist painting has this hat kind of in homage to Tom Thompson. And Gordon Rayner was too a very avid canoeer as well, canoeing along in the areas that Tom Thompson would have been canoeing in. I wish I had a picture of this painting on the side though, so you can see the size of the hat. So similar to kind of the Gentileschi painting that I talked about at the beginning of the lecture, that's not in our collection, of course, is this work in our collection by Lionel Feiniger, a German-American painter, called High Houses 3. Usually when this painting gets kind of discussed, it's the fascinating story about the artist and how we kind of frame this work. So Feiniger, like many artists during his time, was really drawn to Paris as being like the center of artistic activity and creativity. And so this Cubist painting kind of turns this linear scene of Parisian apartment buildings into this kind of complex and maze-like world. So it's probably one of the most important international works in the collection, gifted to us again by Isabel McLaughlin. But it's also one of the only Cubist examples of art in the collection. So while it's a really great example of Cubism, the story behind this work lies in what happened to Feiniger with the rise of Nazi Germany. So during the rise of Nazi power in Feiniger, the Nazi Party declared his work to be degenerate. So in 1937, the Nazis organized the Degenerate Art Exhibition. It included over 650 works of art that was confiscated by German museums from German museums by the Nazis. So degenerate art was defined as works that, quote, insult German feeling or destroy or confuse natural form or simply reveal an absence of adequate manual and artistic skill. So 1 million people apparently attended this exhibition over a period of 6 weeks. Lionel Feiniger's work was included in this exhibition, not the painting that we have, but his other works. And the exhibition followed another exhibition organized by the Nazis previously in the year called the Great German Art Exhibition, which showcased modern art approved by the Nazis. And so while modern styles of art were prohibited, the Nazis promoted paintings and sculptures that were traditional in manner and that exalted the blood and soil values of racial purity, the military, and obedience. So what happened to the artists that were declared degenerate who lived in Germany? So they were subjected to sanctions that included being dismissed from teaching positions, to being forbidden to exhibit or sell their art, or in some cases being forbidden to produce art. So in the case of Lionel Feiniger, thankfully he left Germany in 1936, the year his work was deemed degenerate, but before the exhibition that would kind of cement his reputation in Nazi Germany. So I'm just gonna have a sip of water, 1 second. So now I'm gonna talk about inspiration in different, like inspiration. I know I've kind of covered this with some of the other works in the collection that I talked about, but this is more specifically based on inspiration. And artists can find inspiration in many different ways, through things that they see, things that fascinate them, or just important places or people in their lives, or even be kind of inspired by history. And so this next section kind of discusses the inspiration behind certain artworks in our collection. And so this work, another heavy hitter in the collection, is Lauren Harris's Houses on Chestnut Street. This painting by Group of Seven member Lauren Harris shows an earlier work by the artist, dated 1919. He's probably best known for his Canadian landscape paintings, but before he was inspired by the land, he was inspired by the city in which he lived, Toronto. So Harris was from a really wealthy and conservative family and lived in Forest Hill, and some of you will know is a very affluent neighborhood in Toronto. So at the time that this painting was painted, Harris was painting urban scenes of older neighborhoods of Toronto, including the Ward, which is what we see here, which were all working class neighborhoods in Toronto. So he would venture into these working class neighborhoods as kind of an observing outsider because he was really drawn and inspired by the spirit of Old York. And he was fascinated by the charm and character in these working class neighborhoods despite being an outsider in them. So that's one example of being inspired by, the place that you live. This painting, I absolutely love the story behind this painting. This is by Louis de Niveville, and it's called Early Morning, and it's from 1969. Louis de Niveville was born in England, but grew up in Montreal. He was one of 13 children in his family. And when he was 6 years old, he was hospitalized for 5 years due to spinal tuberculosis. So from 1939 and 1944 of his childhood, he spent that in a hospital. And he really attributes that time that he spent in the hospital as where his kind of interest in fantasy kind of came, and his kind of habit of fantasizing really helped him get through that period of his life. And his work explores memories, kind of observations and dreams, and can kind of be described as surreal, like surrealism. So for this painting entitled Early Morning, he was inspired by two things: a magazine advertisement that he saw and a memory of car rides with his father. So he wrote about this work that he saw in advertisement for small cars. The ad had 3 cars parked on the curb, and it said across it, "Do you feel squeezed?" And in the photograph, there was a kind of a technical trick where each of the cars had been squashed. And so he was really drawn to the visual of this ad, and so he cut it out and then saved it for years, just put it in a file and saved it. And then one day he pulled it out of his files because he felt ready for it. At that time, he was kind of exploring works in his work, exploring, playing with perspectives and stuff like that. So he also wrote about memories of car rides with his father. So I'm going to actually read a passage from what he said about his memory and this artwork because it's just so great. So, quote, "As a child, my father used to take us for car rides, and as you're driving by, you see something, but never see it long enough really to know exactly what it is that's happening. So you see it in your mind. You make up what's happening. In a way, it sets off fantasies of strange kinds of happenings. This painting is what it's all about. It's sort of a glimpse of life, a glimpse of something, and you're not quite sure what it is. But then you make up what is missing, and very often it's more interesting than what is actually there. It's a landscape, but within this landscape, there's something that's a bit strange happening." So that's where his inspiration for this work came from the memory of driving a car and fast things going by and you filling in those images in your mind, but also from an advertisement that he kept for years and years and years showing, a trick with perspective of squashed cars. Like I said, I'm showing you quite a lot of heavy hitters in the collection, but this one is by Emily Carr, and it's called Wood Interior from 1929-1930. So Emily Carr was a Canadian artist and writer who was inspired earlier in her career by the Indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest coast. She was one of the first painters in Canada to adopt a modernist and post-impressionist style. But she didn't really receive widespread recognition for her work until she changed subject matter from Indigenous scenes to landscapes and forest scenes in particular, like this one. So while she was not a member of the Group of Seven, she corresponded with members such as Lauren Harris about art. And in one of their letter exchanges, Harris suggested that she focus on the forest and nature and not so much on totem poles. He said that the totem pole is a work of art in itself and that her focus should be on form, light, color, and nature. And so this is one of the paintings that she painted in response. And as you can see, it really does focus on form, light, and color in nature. So Isabel McLaughlin said that when McLaughlin returned from working in Paris, and she was very familiar with what kind of artistic trends were happening in Paris at the time. And then she visited the CNE, the exhibition of Canadian paintings there, and she was struck with, she describes considerable force with this painting that she ended up buying. She said that it was sharply in contrast to any of the art that she was seeing in Paris. So it was like a breath of fresh, invigorating air, she wrote, totally different from anything I had been seeing in Paris. Those are her words. So the gallery was gifted this work by, again, one of our most important patrons, Isabel McLaughlin. And it is probably one of the most loaned out works in the collection. And in fact, it's actually currently at the National Gallery Canada before it heads to Frankfurt, Germany. And the reason is that it gets requested for loans is that it's one of the most, it's a really important work in her career. It really represents an important shift in her artistic practice. And it really truly captures Carr's ability to focus on light and kind of the atmosphere of the forest. And so I've included here a poem that she wrote that is believed to be about this painting. And again, I mentioned that she was also a writer. And here she describes the experience of, this painting through senses. So what seest thou, what hearest thou, what smellest thou, what feelest thou, and what tastest thou? So if you've had time to read this poem while I've been talking, it really does describe this painting to a T. And so she was inspired by nature with this painting, but also influenced by her friend, Lauren Harris. Okay, so the next one is probably, you've all seen it before. It might be in Merle's background at the moment, but this is a painting, or sorry, a commissioned sculpture on the side of the building of the gallery right out front by Douglas Copeland, called Group Portrait 1957. So I wanted to talk about this work because I find that when I'm talking with people outside of the gallery, it's one of those moments that people are like, oh, what's with the targets on the side of the building? And then when I tell them the story of this, what this work is all about, and where Copeland got his inspiration from, they have a whole new sense of what this sculpture, the importance of this sculpture, and in particular to the community. So internationally renowned artist and author Douglas Copeland was approached in the spring of 2010 to produce a sculpture for the exterior of the gallery. And he actually had a personal relationship with Arthur Erickson, who was the architect of our 1987 gallery expansion. And he also had an ongoing interest in mid-century modernism, which this proposal really appealed to him for those reasons. So the gallery supplied Copeland with images, really important works from the Painters 11 images, and as well as histories of the RMG, particularly related to the work of Painters 11. And so Copeland's work reflects the gallery's curatorial mandate to transmit forward to future generations the work and ideas of its collection, specifically the work of Painters 11. So he used this famous photographic portrait of the group, Peter Croydon's photograph from 1957, as a framework on which to place abstract forms that represent each member. These forms and their colors were derived from key pieces by each member of the 11 members of Painters 11. So when he asked for images from Painters 11, he asked for seminal, really key works from them. And so we supplied them with those images. And then he broke those images down, and I'll show you an example of how he did that. But so then he put these forms, these circular kind of concentric rings where of the color of those artists on the faces of that picture. So this is an example of the work that he was very inspired by, which is a work by Jack Bush. So you can see what he did. He broke this key work by Jack Bush called Breakthrough down to its kind of prime colors before creating it into this transmitter. So this idea of transmitting Painter's 11 into the future and into Oshawa. So that's the kind of the story of that work. And it was installed in September 2011. And yeah, it's a very fun, colorful, brings the front of the building kind of to life. So earlier I talked about how titles can allude to a story or give context of information about artwork sometimes. But often with abstract works, abstract titles are usually like untitled, you know, shapes and colors, references, or even just numbers, or very simple titles, leaving the viewer kind of to engage with the work freely. But in the case of these next works that I'm going to talk about, the title actually references the inspiration behind the work as well as the process. So for example, this work by Harold Town again, the gentleman with the 3 portraits, as I mentioned, he was a member of Painter's 11 and a prolific painter who experimented with many different styles and approaches to abstract painting. He often worked in series, and he said that this work, called The Fence, is actually a standalone work for him. He said that it didn't really relate to any of his other works. He wrote about this work that it was the result of a direct experience he had walking down Parliament Street in Toronto. He came across a fence that had been knocked down at some point and reassembled. And so the advertisement that was painted on the boards no longer made any graphic sense. And the image kind of stayed in his mind for several days. And he said that he actually put this painting down and made this painting so that the image wouldn't be in his mind anymore. And so it's a really great example of artistic process. So not unlike writers, sometimes painters have an idea and they just need to get it down, whether or not it's a sketch, a drawing, whatever, so that it doesn't stay in their head. And this is a perfect example of that. So something that a visual he saw walking down the street that stayed with him that he created into a painting. And a similar example to that is another member by Painters of Painter's 11, Tom Hodgson. This is called Portrait of a Shirt. This, just as a side note, it's just an interesting fact about Tom Hodgson was that on top of being a painter, he was also an avid canoeer who was so good at canoeing that he actually represented Canada in canoeing at the Helsinki and Melbourne Olympics. So pretty cool, very interesting fellow who grew up on Toronto Island, and so he was quite used to paddling. So as the title suggests, the idea for this abstract painting came from a shirt. So he was looking at his yellow, red, black striped shirt in the mirror of a men's washroom with pink walls. And he was struck by the odd color combination and decided to bring this out in a painting. So here's actually, it's a little blurry, my apologies, a photo of him sitting in front of the painting in the shirt that inspired the painting. So for abstract artists, color plays such an important role. And in this case, the color combination of his shirt was the motivation and inspiration behind the painting. Now, this, I believe, is the last work I'll be talking about, but this is also by Tom Hodgson. It's called It Became Green. And it's an example of an abstract painting where the title kind of suggests the process, tells you a little bit about the process behind the work. So as the title comes from the fact that Hodgson was reworking the canvas over and over again, and that eventually the color palette became green. But what I love the most about this painting is that he was included in a group show at a museum called Riverside Museum in New York. And the exhibition actually had width restrictions for the sizes of the artwork that you could put into the show, but they didn't have any height restrictions. And so I've actually included the dimensions of this painting because it's very tall. So that was Hodgson's being a little cheeky because he was very much known for his large format canvases. And so this is him working within restrictions, but going a little wild with the height. So in conclusion, I could honestly speak about so many more works in the collection, and I feel that this topic could easily become a series, but I just want to end by saying that I feel so lucky to study and curate from this incredible collection, but I also feel incredibly honored to share it with the community. It's a wonderful resource and collection located right here in Oshawa, and one that is so important to engage the community with. So I wanted to kind of end my talk by kind of telling you ways that you can further engage with the collection. So there's actually 4 permanent collection exhibitions up right now if you visit the gallery in person. But we also have a virtual RMG, which if you go to this link, which I'm just going to go to the website, hold on 1 second. If you go to Virtual RMG, which is a tab right at the top, there's different ways that you can engage with gallery programming. So we have virtual exhibitions, so online exhibitions featuring the Boakley collection as well as the permanent art collection. We have public programming, so videos of different talks, things like that. There's also videos of different art activities that you can do at home. And then you can also search the collections, and that includes the art collection, the Boakley collection, as well as the library, the art library that we have at the gallery. And then also digital publications. So any of our past publications that are available to read digitally is also on Virtual RMG. So I just wanted to also mention those things, because I know that right now it can be a bit challenging to kind of engage with what's going on in the community. And if you can't make it to the gallery in person, there's ways to connect with us online. And that's it for me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sonia. I was just sitting there absolutely captivated by that talk. As it was going on, we did receive one question in the chat. Children's party. Is there a significance to the night sky and the constellations that are shown? And there is a remark saying that it is very impressive.
Oh, wonderful. I saw that Linda Jansma was in here at one point, and she would know that work in and out and all the details. I wonder if she'd be willing to speak. Hello, Linda. I'm calling you out, Linda.
Hi, I can't say I know anything particular around around the night sky. It must just when they attended the work, you know, when they had the party in the evening.
Yeah, I think that you're talking about the children's party, right? The question was regarding children's party?
Yes, it was.
Yes. So yeah, absolutely. I don't think there was anything that's probably why they felt that the work could be cut down and put in a frame that's a little bit smaller, because they didn't feel like it was all that important. But as you can see, the sky is so beautiful and really gives a sense of scale.
And then there was one other question. Was the slide of the town portrait 3 separate pieces?
Yes, sorry. I was wondering if someone was going to ask that. That's 3 separate paintings, yeah, that I just kind of put together so that you can compare them. So yeah, 3 very different approaches to those portraits.
And I have to also add, just from my own perspective, I really did appreciate your discussion around the group portrait, the Copeland piece, coming from the perspective that I do, giving the downtown walking tours. We touch on it, but it's always great to have that professional art background, giving that additional context. But where I see knowing the story really affecting how people appreciate the pieces is when we stop at the Tributes Community Center and we talk about, oh my goodness, the name of the sculpture is completely escaping me right now, but the sculpture which is out front of the Tributes Community Center.
The Noel Harding Reverb.
Thank you. Yes, Reverb. Thank you. Wonderful. Yeah, so I've heard quite a number of people having very strong opinions about that piece, but then when we're on the tour, I'm able to get into a little bit of the history and how the artist himself is inspired and what it gets to represent, and you can see the look in people's faces of changing in their recognition, and they're like, oh, it's like it clicks into piece, like, oh, they get it, and it's really wonderful to be able to add those additional layers onto things.
For sure, yeah, absolutely.
So one other question, how did Mrs. I'm going to mispronounce her name, my apologies, Kuralik come to pick the RMG for donating the wall art?
Well, that work was donated in 1991, so I would assume that it was based on her maybe a relationship with the director at the time, Joan Murray. Joan Murray was very good at fostering relationships with different artists, and I'm sure that she chose based on the fact that of Joan Murray's reputation, but also the RMG's reputation, possibly at the time.
Wonderful.
I may be able to add a little bit to that. You're right about Joan and the relationship she had with the Krelliks, but Joan actually did a traveling exhibition of William Krellik's work that traveled across the country. So that's when she became really close with the family. And Av Isaacs was also the dealer for William Krellik. And Joan also had a really good relationship with Av as well. So there was kind of a double whammy there, but Joan really knew her Krellik stuff. I don't know what year that exhibition was, but mid 80s or so. So she knew the whole family really well.
Thank you, Linda.
Are there any other questions for this evening? No, well then, once again, a huge thank you to Sonya. Thank you so much. That was just an absolutely fascinating talk. It makes me miss galleries and getting to experience these in person. So thank you so much for sharing these stories, for adding those extra layers, which helps increase everybody's appreciation. And with that, also thank you to everyone again for joining us. This is our last speaker series for 2020. We're planning on keeping going in the virtual format for 2021, at least for the next foreseeable future. So I will, of course, be sending this out in emails. We don't have the speaker pinned down yet, but the next date will be Tuesday, January 19th. And yes, I am looking off a calendar to have that date because I would not know that off the top of my head. Thank you, everyone. I hope as we're entering this holiday season, I hope everybody has a very wonderful holiday season, that you stay well, that you stay safe. And once again, huge thank you on behalf of the museum, and I hope I can take the liberty on behalf of the gallery as well for joining us this evening. Take care.
Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. Bye, take care.